Welcome to the Sacred Child Summit. I'm your host, Kathleen Sherrick, and I'm pleased to introduce to you today Dr. Carla Hannaford. I'm so excited about this. I just am looking forward to this conversation, Dr. Hannaford. Dr. Hannaford is a biologist, an author, and an educator with more than 40 years of teaching experience, including 20 years as a professor of biology and 4 years as a school counselor for children with learning difficulties. Since 1988, she has been an internationally recognized educational consultant and a workshop leader to more than 50 countries across the world. She's been cited in more than 1,000 books and journals on the science behind learning, brain gym, and how to live a healthy and growth-filled life. She was selected as guest educator to the AHP Soviet project and has been recognized by Who's Who in American education. She has received many awards for her work on the planet. She's the author of 4 best-selling books: Smart Moves, Awakening the Child Heart, The Dominance Factor, and Playing in the Unified Field. Dr. Hannaford, I'm so pleased to welcome you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Well, we want to talk about awakening the child heart. And is the child heart asleep, Carla?
Actually, our children, if we get rid of adulterating them, they're wide awake. It's so interesting to me. Children are very aware. We know that Rivlin and Gravel at Princeton University discovered that there are at least 19 senses that we know of receptor sites for. And children are wide awake to it. They're very aware. And as we take on our reality from our culture, from our families, from our education and that, we start shutting down the possibilities. And if we listen to children, we're going to learn a whole lot because they are still very, very aware. We know from quantum physics that we're vibration, and our children pick those vibrations up very clearly, and so they need to be our teachers.
And do you think that this starts in the womb? I know that you have mentioned in other presentations and talks about the sensitivity in utero and how how brain dominance begins in utero and so many other things.
Right. From my research, what I've discovered is that about 9 weeks in utero, that's when the embryo develops the Morrow reflex, which if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, the very base has to do with survival. And so it's just a survival reflex. It's a reflex. But at that time, the embryo develops a dominant hemisphere, hand, eye, ear, and foot, so that in a survival, in a life and death situation, they can fight if they need to, and that one arm comes out, or they can get that foot out, which so they can run away from danger, so they can fight or flee. So it's a reflex. And then about 6-7 months in utero is when they start to hear or react to sound. And then the vestibular system is being developed actually very early. And, it's very interesting. By about the 7th month, 8th month, they're very aware of stress in the parent. Well, actually before, because adrenaline and cortisol go across the placental barrier into the baby, and we know they will have that Morrow reflex.
What is the effect of parent stress on a child?
Oh boy.
Yeah, that's a whole workshop in itself, isn't it?
It is, but the child, even the embryo, The fetus, for sure, mirrors any kind of stress that the parent has. And then when they're born, yeah, any of our stress, the child will absolutely do that. We have mirror neurons in the brain, and that's how we learn to be human. So we mirror those around us. And of course, our parents are the ones that are around us the most. And if they're stressed, we're stressed, and we're producing adrenaline and cortisol. The baby is producing adrenaline and cortisol. So they'll cry, or they will react with the moral reflex and be what we say hyperactive or hypervigilant to the dangers in their life and the dangers in the parent's life. So whenever I'm working with children, I always work with the parents because our children are really mirroring us. And so if we can stop our stress, the child can stop their stress. And of course, right now with the pandemic and everything that's going on, there's a lot of fear. And those children are so sensitive to pick that fear up and then respond to it. Our children are much more aware than we are. So it's really important as parents for us to stop our stress. Now, here's an interesting thing, Kathleen, is the way our physiology is set up. There's no such thing as good stress and bad stress. There's either survival or no survival, because our bodies haven't gotten to that point where we say being late for a meeting is not a life and death situation, or, you know, being in a traffic jam is not a life and death situation. So we as parents, it's really important for us to stop and get present. This is what we've realized is when we become really present in the moment, we can look around and look at what is good in our lives. Dean Ornstein did a very interesting study with heart attack patients where he split them half and half. So we had 400 patients and 400 patients. With one set of 400 patients, he says, whenever you start to get stressed, whenever you start to fear or anxiety, anything that comes into your life, stop, sit down, and then look around. I mean, we in the United States are so privileged. I think of these poor people coming up from South America and Central America right now. We're fed well, we've got beautiful surroundings, we've got really everything we need, and start to be grateful and really be a present with what is there. So in this study, at the end of a year, none of that 400 group that sat and got present and appreciated their life, their environment, had reoccurring heart attacks. 43% of the other group had reoccurring heart attacks. So we as parents, we need to get present. The brain gym work is excellent because what it does is it helps us become coherent. It forces the brain into an integrated state. When we're under stress, we know, from PET scans and CAT scans that 75 to 85% of the brain shuts down, and especially the frontal lobe where we do executive reasoning, where we have the high level emotions of love, altruism, compassion. Whoops, just a minute here. Oh no. Okay. And so that part shuts down. The part that is very active has to do with our survival, with running or fighting. And we can't think clearly, we can't learn, we can't create new ideas, can't be creative.
Well,
So that's what happened.
it occurs to me also that, parenting is so stressful these days with the expectations of social media, excuse me, and the different blogs that have various information. There is an overwhelmment that happens with all the information out there. And so how does a parent or a grandparent or someone who's in a child's life really, how do they discern what decisions to make for their child, for themselves, for their families? And it occurs to me that Brain Gym, what you have taught all over the world, and by the way, thank you for that. My family has been personally affected by you and your work. My young adult children still use Brain Gym, and the teachers at the school I co-founded, we were fortunate to have them all trained in it. This is such a beautiful, one of many tools that you have shared with the world. Can you tell us what Brain Gym is and how it sounds like this is a tool that can be used to bring down that, and then also, what is a coherent state?
Okay. So Brain Gym is basically integrated cross-lateral movements. And one of the things that we're realizing physiologically is that when we're stressed, actually, this shutdown that happens in the brain affects only one side of the brain. Okay, so we become what we call homolateral, so that we're not using much of our brain. When we take a walk, for instance, it integrates both hemispheres because you're using both legs, you're using both arms, you're crossing the midline. Okay, Brain Gym is basically about crossing the midline and using both hemispheres at the same time. One of the activities we do, and we just did this, was if you take your arms like this, your hands out like this, and then cross them over, hold them under, get your shoulders away from your earlobes. You're forcing the brain into an integrated state. You're forcing it into using both sides. So there's a huge area here of the brain on both sides that has to do with the hand. This is our greatest tool. It takes 20 years to fully develop this structure. It's very important. And the more we use it, the more our brain is developing. So children that are just doing this all the time on their smartphone is not developing this. And right now we're seeing a lot of children that can't even use clothespins. They don't have the right pressure. They don't know how to use their hands properly. The way they write is they grab a pen, they aren't using this structure that's so important that takes up this much of the brain. So when we do this, we're activating those huge areas of the brain, the sensory motor cortex for the hands. The other thing that we do is we cross our legs so that we are activating both feet. And again, if we look at the brain, what areas of the brain are the largest? It has to do with the feet and the hands, the motor areas and the sensory areas. So cross-lateral integrated movements are very important.
And this is related to learning. Is that right? It's related to learning how to read. It's related to being able to absorb the senses, the sensations in our world all around us as young children, and even as adults, we can be doing this.
Right. The left side of the brain has to do with our language, the language brain, so verbal language and that sort of thing. The right side of the brain has to do with emotion. It has to do with a rhythm sort of thing. So just even speaking, the left side of the brain is doing that verbal language, but the right side of the brain is giving us dialect. It's giving us emotion. It's we need both all the time. And we know right now dyslexia is actually a hearing problem before it's a visual problem, is where sound, they're missing sound discrimination. So they're not hearing the sounds of the words that we're saying, and so they can't speak them. And then if they can't speak them, it's difficult for them to understand the symbols that represent those words. So a very good brain gym that I love a lot, because hearing is probably our most important sense. It's the one also for helping with memory. And so it's doing what we call thinking caps. So we're unrolling our earlobes from top to bottom. Oops. Oh, I just lost my there. So let me go on this ear here. Right? Unrolling our earlobes from top to bottom like this. Now, what's happening? This is very powerful, very profound. Right now, there are 60 journals coming into the National Medical Library in Washington, D.C., just on research on traditional Chinese medicine. And 500 years ago, the Yellow Emperor said, 144 points in the ear that they would use for acupuncture or activating. Now, the research is showing there's thousands of points in the ear that actually activate the rest of the body. And when you start up here at the top, you're activating the feet. And then as you come down to the earlobe, you're activating the head. So everything in between. And so being able to hear the language. And of course, this is big too, because we as parents need to be reading to our children, talking to our children, having our children talk to us. So we know that they're actually picking up the language so that later on, when they read it, it'll make sense for them. It'll be an understanding. And a lot of times, I think children today are picking up the language via digital means. So computers, cell phones, anything that is digitized. MP3s are so digitized that they cut out 89% of what we call the really important parts of language, like that delineate the words, the overtones and harmonics that are very important for us to understand the language so we can speak it. So they need to be hearing the human voice.
And again, this can start in utero as well, right? Or before then even, the human voice. And so interesting that hearing, you do hear, for example, that hearing is the last sense to go. It sounds like it's one of the first to be developed as well. And then you did mention there were 19 different senses.
At least. They think there's probably hundreds, but we know of 19 senses that have receptor sites for, that we know of.
And so for us to be able to understand who our child really is at the earliest possible time that we can, what are some ways that we can do that? It sounds like that understanding dominance in our child can help us understand who they are as who they've come here to be.
Yeah, it's certainly helpful. Our children are different than us. And so when we understand those differences, we don't judge them. I get these parents coming into me and they go, my child never listens to me. And I could say the same thing about my husband. But, they're blocked on their hearing, especially when there's stress. So the ear that they normally hear from connects with the opposite hemisphere. If that hemisphere is on the same side, so say this hemisphere and this ear, when they're under stress, they're not going to hear. We know that from my research, which is a lot of research, that at least 50% of the population is blocked on their hearing. And so when they're under stress, they're not going to hear. So doing things like this will help them to be able to hear.
And so if you have a parent, for example, and the dominance factors, as you mentioned, are ears, eyes, we have a dominant hand, we have a dominant foot, all these kinds of things. And you have so eloquently identified in the dominance factor book how different profiles affect the ability to kind of operate in the world, the intake of information. And so if you have a parent, for example, who has a certain dominance profile, then you have a child who has something completely opposite, what happens then? What can a parent do?
There's total misunderstanding when there's stress. When there's not stress, when we do the brain gym work, both hemispheres are on. Now you can use both eyes, you can use both ears, both hands, both feet easily. But when we're under stress, like I say, half of the brain shuts down, more than half, but for sure the non-dominant side shuts down and it just goes into survival. And so it's when there's stress that you're not going to understand each other.
Very good. Very good point.
Again,
yes.
You know, just like the eyes, again, about half the population are blocked on their eyes. So if there's a stress and somebody's talking to us, or if the teacher is trying to get a point across to a child, they may close their eyes or look somewhere else in order to use their other senses. And the teacher will say, eyes forward, look at me. Or the parent will say, look at me when I'm talking. And they can't. Or if they do, it's more stressful. So realizing, you know, that we are different and how we're different is really important. So.
And this kind of, you mentioned earlier coherence. Can you tell us more about what coherence is? And it sounds like it's a certain state that is desired.
Right. When we're coherent, we're absolutely present in the moment. And so this is one of the things I say to parents because it's really important. So often, especially women, us women, we are multitaskers. And so we're doing all sorts of things. We're getting dinner ready, we're doing this, we're getting ready for this, we're grocery shopping, whatever. And our children come to us to say something to us, and we listen, but we only listen with half of our brain. The rest of the time we're doing other things. And what we need to do is stop. Become coherent, stop, get down on the child's level and listen to them. It is absolutely the most important thing we can do as a parent. It also as a spouse, you know, we're oftentimes just so busy doing other things that we don't stop. It's interesting to me, the studies they've done with men and women, is men are actually better at being present with children and playing with children. The women, we kind of set the rules and, you know, for their safety and are you okay? And, you know, for their
Be careful.
Yeah, be careful. But we really need to stop and listen to them. And what's interesting is if we don't, they bug us. Mommy, 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 this, mommy, because they need to know that they're safe. They need to know that we're present with them. If we stop and get down on their level and listen, absolutely listen, it'll take 2 minutes at the most, and then they're off playing and they feel safe. So it's one of the most important things that we can do for them.
Is this, you've talked about cross crawl and a couple of things, this kind of integrated movement. It occurs to me, for example, oftentimes, especially young parents or new parents are excited when a child starts to walk, especially if they're walking early. Oh, it's such a great sign. And can you tell us what the impact on crawling and creeping and these kinds of movements at an
Yeah.
early stage, like what is the desired goal there for our children to be fully healthy?
Okay, for the physiology to truly develop properly, the child needs a lot of floor time. And early on, and they need to be on their bellies. And I know there's this fear of sudden infant death, but when they're awake, they need to be on their bellies because they're doing very important reflexes that help both ears to hear, both eyes to start coming in alignment. The child does not see the way we do until about 15 months after birth, but they have to develop their other senses, especially hearing and their core. So they need to be able to be on their bellies where they can do these asymmetrical tonic neck reflexes that get the neck strong, the ears strong, the core of the body strong. And then as they do that, they'll start rolling over. That's great. They have to do it basically from belly to rolling, and then they can roll back. Very important. And finally, kind of pulling themselves up and sitting up. But then finally, they'll get to a point where they're on their hands and knees and they're moving back and forth. And if they straighten their arms up, they start for the first time to actually see distance. And then if they bend their arms, they go down, they start to see up close. And this isn't until about 5 to 6 months of age. And then they will start to crawl. And what's interesting, at first they'll start homolaterally on one side, but it doesn't bring in all the senses. And they're a little unstable. So then pretty soon they start to crawl across, or they start to do the military crawl, on the floor. But eventually they'll get up and they'll start to crawl. They need to crawl. They need to crawl until at least a year of age. And then when they're ready, and this is it with parents, we need to let the child lead in this process. They will know when they're ready. And instead of pulling them up to walk, it's the worst thing you can do because it messes up the pelvic girdle so that they're not getting the proper alignment. And then they have problems, with their alignment for a long time. Even I've noticed, upsetting, these parents that wear their babies in front of them like a shield with the face out where the baby is dangling. It's very hard on the pelvic structure so that they can't align as well when they're standing up.
Oh,
And
I could see where they may want to, they may be thinking baby wants to see what's happening, but what you're saying is this is too soon. There's more development that needs to happen and there's a sensitive time for that and it's now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the baby isn't seeing, but what they are, the baby is being accosted by the environment, and all this stress. And it's stressful for the baby. You need to turn them around so they're against the heart. They can hear the heartbeat and they are protected, So anyway, so back to crawling. They're going to crawl. Pretty soon they start to pull themselves up on the furniture. That's when we know they're ready to start standing. But they need to be doing the process. That is a really important thing. And they need to be staying away from technology. So I want to say a few things about that. And I know
please do. And I know it's a challenging thing these days. It's getting to be more and more integrated into family lives. It's organizing family lives. There are some apps that you may know of that also, that regulate the schedule for each child on almost a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah. Okay. Watching the computer, if you turn the lights out, and just watch, there's a flicker on the computer, on the TV screen. And that flicker sets up a message in the brain of something's coming out of the forest at me. So when children are on computer a long time, or not even a whole long time, or cell phones, they're actually in a survival state. Their cortisol and adrenaline levels are higher. It makes it difficult for them to learn. And we're seeing that now since the pandemic. Children are really sliding back in their ability to learn because they're on the computers so often, so much. So what is the remedy? One, your parent. So limit the time that they're on. And for all the time they're on, they need to twice as much time be out, playing, being in nature, and moving their bodies. We're seeing what we call nature deprivation disorder right now, where the children are not out in fresh air. In China, it's real interesting. They've mandated it. See, we can't do that in the United States, but in China, they've mandated that children, no computers on the weekend, no cell phones on the weekend, no technology on the weekends, and the parents are to play with their children. During the week, it's also limited to 4 hours a day by the government. So,
And in this scenario, you believe that that is in the best interest of the children,
yes,
sounds like,
and it's probably in the best interest of the parents
and
too.
the families.
Yeah, the whole family. So, having that time to be with the child, play with the child, and then be in nature. Or the child comes and says, I'm bored. That's perfect. Say, good, go figure it out. Go play a game. Be creative, do something. And the child at first will be really upset. But if you can, I love the love and logic work that Bob Sorensen works with, where he says, you just don't break a sweat. You say, no computer now. You have to figure it out. Go play. And you just stay.
Leave them to their own internal devices, I guess, right?
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
you've talked before about a child's inner knowing. So how can we as parents connect with that? As what's the earliest possible? What does the research show? And how important is that to connect with the child's inner knowing?
Okay, very important. Coherence is being present. Okay, so what we need to do, I had 3 thoughts at once, and all of a sudden I'm just like, the child knows what is coherent and what is not coherent, just like a dog knows. Some people they'll bark at, and some people they're just fine with. They know if the person is present and coherent, okay, in a safe place where that person is joyful, is very, very present, okay? So the child knows it. So when we take the child to say, give Uncle Harry a hug, and the baby doesn't want to do that, they cry and they go, no, no. And that child knows that Uncle Harry is not coherent at that moment, that he's in stress or survival or something, or just a little fearful or anxious. The baby knows, and they will react. That's their job. Their job is to know whether it's safe in their environment or not. If we, because of our ego, force it, say, come on, give Uncle Harry a hug, what the child says to themselves is, I can't trust my knowing. And
Wow,
then we've
that's
lost
important.
them.
Wow.
It's really important. The other thing is, children are very aware. Like I say, their sensory apparatus is out there, very aware. And Princeton University at the PEAR lab has realized that there are different vibrational frequencies that are in our environment, all around us, affecting us. And when the child comes to us and says, there's a ghost under my bed, there's probably a ghost under their bed. There's a different vibrational frequency there. And at the PEAR lab, they've discovered that, a lot of times these ghosts like to be near children because children are so coherent and present, And so rather than just saying, there's not a ghost, going up and talking to the ghost, saying, the child is a little scary. Are you just wanting to be near my child because my child's so special and wonderful? Something, this child is more aware than we are. And they can give us a lot of information if we listen, because they're still open to that. As they get older, we start to shut them down. No, that can't be. This can't be. That can't be. This, and we narrow their reality. And our reality as an adult is quite narrowed. Sometimes we are not aware of what is safe and what isn't. But again, what we want for our children is for them to trust their knowing, trust their inner knowing. And I don't know about you, Kathleen, but with me, the more that I've done the brain gym, the more I'm aware of things in my environment, the more I feel, I know when things are not good, bad vibes, vibrations, stay out of that situation. I'm come back to a more childlike state that makes me more safe.
And that I absolutely agree with you there, that the sensitivity that can be raised and cultivated, that this sensing of energies, of energetic fields can be cultivated. It's not something scary. It's not something wild or crazy out there. It is something that is innate within us. And if what it sounds like you're saying is if we understand the child is already coming in with all of this sensing, all open, like we are not as parents like writing on a blank slate. We are receiving as hosts, and we're hosting this child that's coming in, and that this child already comes in with knowing. And what a paradigm shift that can be, especially if as parents we grew up with a different kind of parenting. If we were parented in a way that closed off all of our knowing, so maybe we don't feel we actually know much.
Right. Take a walk with a child and let them lead. And they will see things that you can't see. They will notice things that you don't notice. They're in awe, they're in wonder. This is magical, And the thing is, the truth is, in us too, we've never been here before. We will never be here again. In this moment, in this time, there is wonder. There's amazement, and how do we get through the pandemic? By noticing it. I just have to say there was a study done on people that survived very difficult situations, and they weren't the optimists, because the optimists would say, oh, everything's going to be fine pretty soon. They weren't the pessimists. They were the people that said, this is the situation right now. What can I learn from it? What is the wonder? This is a wonder. Our children will bring us wonder if we give them the opportunity.
And this is like, it's cultivating curiosity is what it sounds like. Both if we have, for whatever reason, either in our own childhoods or as we've grown through our own life experiences, if we have intentionally or unintentionally narrowed our scope of senses, that by cultivating and even being open to this sense of wonder through the eyes of a child, that we can actually break through into new ways of being, is what you're saying.
One of my favorite quotes from Einstein, he says, I have no special gifts, I'm just passionately curious.
Yes.
If we're curious, remember our children have these mirror neurons, we all do, but if we're curious, they're going to be curious. And that's what we want. And we want to be curious too.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about your, I love curiosity, and it just opens up worlds. And if we go on a walk with a toddler, you know, we might get about 10 feet. Because there's a little insect over there, and there, look at this ladybug, and all of these beautiful things. And so as adults, we have to monitor ourselves a little bit and say, why do I want to hurry up and get the walk in and done, instead of being present with our little ones? That's really, it's really a line for us to walk when we've got work responsibilities, we've got all kinds of pressures or perceived pressures. I'm going to say that, perceived pressures. It sounds like one of the things you're advising as well is if we change how we perceive our scenario, our situation, our experience, that we can attain that coherent state, and we can be in line with our child, whatever stage they're at. And then we understand who they are, we understand ourselves better. And the parenting journey and the childhood journey sounds like it really can be magical.
Very and it's short. Oh my gosh. It doesn't take long
short.
and they're grown. Yeah.
Yes. Some of us can say that, and it's like every day might seem long when they're little, and yet it goes by in the blink of an eye, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Are there any suggestions that you have for grandparents?
Oh my gosh.
For grandparents, just, you know, in terms of grandchildren, educators that may be working in a classroom, in terms of anything that you haven't shared yet that you think would be of
grandparents are very lucky. Yeah, because they could just supposedly spoil. I don't know that the word spoil is very good. I mean, really be with the child a lot of times, and that's wonderful. Again, I think probably the most important thing we can do as grandparents, as educators, as parents, just be present with our children. And the other thing is, we are the parent. And so setting boundaries, our children will push us until we set boundaries. They need the boundaries to feel safe. You know, they really do. And we think, oh, just let them go, they'll be happier. They're not. They want boundaries to stay safe. I just remember when my daughter, we had gone through a divorce, and I was with my daughter here in Montana, and I so wanted her to have friends and play with these neighbor kids, these two neighbor kids that were wonderful and the same age around. And one day, the mother of those two children says, I'm not letting my children play with your daughter anymore. And I said, oh, why? Just because you don't set any boundaries for her. And she's just spoiled. She's just acting out all the time because she doesn't have that safety net from you. And I was feeling guilty about going through the divorce. And I was just like anything, you know, giving her whatever, doing whatever. And it helped so much. It was the nicest thing this woman could have told me. And, you know, I started setting boundaries, and then we aligned, my daughter and I. But I really needed to set those boundaries. Setting the boundaries on technology, you know, taking the cell phone away. Here's another thing I think is so important. Rudolf Steiner said, before the age of 11, we have to stay away from technology. And unfortunately, we can't do that right now with this pandemic. But because in those first 11 years, they're developing what we know as the global brain, where they're able to see the world as a whole, and they're taking in all these valuable pieces that then they can build on to create new realities. They need to be able to get that global brain in place. Maria Montessori also talked about it. Even Steve Jobs would not let his children have computers before the age of 11, actually longer when they were teenagers. And because he knew, he came, he helped his dad in the shop with motors and stuff like that. So he came with a skill set so that when he did come to computers, he could be creative with it. But we need to develop those skill sets. And that skill set means nature, absolute nature, being in nature. Because the formations in nature, the Archimedean twists, the things that give us the patterns that allow us to understand language and mathematics are in nature. And children get it there. So, we just, we need to set boundaries. We need to say when you're not, where you're having to be on a computer for school, no. Let's be creative. Let's go be curious. Let's go explore our world. And anyway,
Thank you.
I guess
you.
I'm passionate about that.
Well, and you have had deep experience, so it's worth definitely paying attention to what you are sharing so passionately. So I really appreciate that. I've got one quick question, and that has to do with you've talked about mirror neurons a couple of times now. And tell us what that is and why it's important for us to be aware of that.
So we've discovered we have mirror neurons all over the brain, and that we mirror those around us to learn and to learn how to be human. Okay, our children do what we do, not what we say. They are watching us. They're absolutely watching us. Children that have colic, it's nervous parents. All they're doing is mirroring nervous parents. So it's usually the first child, and we're nervous because we're not sure we're doing it right. And then they have colic because they can do is activate that through their body, and they're picking up our fear, and then they show it, they mirror it through their bodies. Our children are 2-year-olds. We go to a grocery store after we've been working all day and we're tired and we're hungry and and so the child throws a fit, Well, all they're doing is okay, I want to understand this feeling that you're having right now, and the only way I can do it is through my body. And so they're mirroring our emotions. If we want to know how we're feeling right now, watch our children.
Oh,
that's the other
really
thing
important. Wow, that is quite an insight right there.
and this is the other thing, that whole thing of when we're not feeling good, the child will know immediately, and they'll come and they'll go, "Mommy, are you feeling bad?" And because we're the parent, we go, "Oh no, I'm okay." Not good, not good. Better to say, "Yeah, I'm just not feeling okay right now." And then they can rub our backs or do something that really helps us. Instead of saying, "Oh, I can't trust my knowing that my parent is feeling bad."
So it sounds like if we can develop and cultivate our own innate curiosity that probably was there from the beginning, that we may have narrowed down some through life. And if we can cultivate that within ourselves, then our children are likely to just simply embody it because of our being able to express that through our movements, through our mirror neurons, through our emotions that are coherent. And thank you for sharing all of that, because, as parents, grandparents, people who, those of us that have worked with young children, we're always looking for tools. How can we find the center? How can we honor those that were around, these young beings, no matter what their ages in utero, babies, 3, 5, whatever their ages might be. How can we honor them, and how can we be open to maybe parts of ourselves we're not comfortable with because we
There's
haven't
one
used
other
them.
very, very important thing: movement and play. Down on the floor, rough and tumble play. Penskap told us, we have neurons that are specifically for rough and tumble play. Getting down on the floor and really getting with the child, playing. They love it. It helps them know where they are in space. Our teenagers, they need it. They've gotten bigger. They've grown more skin, and they need that touch. Touch is the greatest anchor. We need to be hugging and strong and playing and moving. We've got to move. We've got to be moving a lot.
Well, this is another reason for grandparents to stay in shape so you can roll on the ground, and for parents to be able to be active with their children, right? So
exactly.
And educators as well. That movement is really important. It's not something to be shunned. It's not something to shame someone for. You're moving about the classroom, please sit still, and those kinds of things. Yeah.
The only way we learn actually is through movement. So, that's a whole nother story, but we have got to move in order to learn.
Well, I love these children then that are constantly doing a somersault as they enter the room, or leaping over the sofa, or humming, or all of these things that they do because they are innately themselves and they're in touch with their own inner knowing. So they're doing what they need to do. And in those situations, for parents to be able to say, I see you. And how about if we do the somersaults over here instead, maybe? And set those kinds of boundaries. It sounds like some ways that they can handle that.
Yeah. So important.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carla. And are there any other things that you would like to share with our audience today that you feel is important in this preconception to age 6, these early years? You've shared so much of your insights.
Again, the movement.
That's really important, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so important. A child that moves in the classroom, we know that in order to take in information well through the vestibular system, the vestibule, the entryway into the brain, is you need to move. So we say to the child, I really want you to know this. And so they start to move. And what do we say? Sit still. No, this is a perfect time. And the other thing that they can do is, if they have to sit still, then they'll lean back on their chair. So it's on the back 2 legs.
So they're still moving.
They're still moving, which helps the vestibular system to be able to take in information.
And what
it's the only way we do it.
And what do we see as educators or as parents? They're ruining the chair. So it really
They're going to fall over.
They're going to fall over. Be careful. So this is part of this journey is really removing our own filters, looking through our own veils we may have unintentionally created through our own experiences, and seeing.
So what you do as a teacher is you go, oh, it's time, and you point out a brain gym monitor and say, what activity do we need to do for 1 minute? 1 minute. And so they get up and they cross crawl, or they do hookups, or they do thinking caps, or they do lazy 8s for the eye. Everybody does it. Then they're ready again, And so I know one teacher, when they would start to get really, really like this in Hawaii, she'd say, okay, out the door. And everybody would go out the door, down the stairs, up the other stairs, back and into their seats. And then they were there. Then they were present.
Get it out of your system, use your system in a sense, and come back to center.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Dr. Hannaford, thank you so much today for sharing your wisdom with all of us. To our audience here, I hope you found some gems in this conversation. I know that I have, and I want to thank everyone who's listening for their attention and their interest in this topic, because together we can continue to raise consciousness around the sacredness of the child within our own selves, within our families, within our communities. And I'm grateful to you, Carla, today for helping us expand our own awareness of the things that are possible. Very grateful
Thank you,
to you.
Kathleen, too.
Very
Thank you
grateful. And
so much.
for more information about Dr. Carla Hannaford, you can go to the links that we have here surrounding and accompanying this video. Thank you.